What happened at a wedding that let you know the marriage was going to end in a divorce? Story 1. The bride, whom I didn't even know, apparently designated me to help decorate the reception hall prior to the wedding. I went to do so, and her mother was there, telling me in a hushed, scared whisper that I better not mess anything up because the bride would be furious. Everything was to be a certain way, and if it was wrong, there'd be hell to pay. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, chalked it up to wedding anxiety, and during the reception I tried to chat with her a bit and she literally rolled her eyes at me. I also didn't see her look at the groom once at the wedding or the reception. They were split less than a year later. Later, the groom confided to me and my husband that the morning of the wedding he'd been filled with an overwhelming feeling of dread and spent several hours just sitting in his own thinking, I shouldn't do this. But it was paid for, tons of guests were waiting, lots of families, including us, had come in from out of state and he felt he had to go through with it. Apparently, the bride had a history of being awful and controlling. No clue what made him propose to her in the first place. Just Facebook stalked the ex-bride. Her latest status update is announcing her wedding date with a new guy. Someone jokingly asked in the comments if they set a date for the divorce. Oh snap. That just won the award for Best Wedding Announcement reply. I've never seen a darker amount of shade. Story 2. My cousin got his casual fling knocked up and somehow they came to the conclusion that they needed to get married. Instead of going and getting quietly married, they decided they needed a gigantic, expensive wedding. Like 5-course meal, 300 plus guests, 12 bridesmaids kind of wedding. Obviously, something like this takes a while to plan and as a result, she was about 7 months pregnant. No, nothing wrong with going down the aisle while expecting, but she chose this corseted dress that was cinched so tight it nearly flattened her bump out. As someone who has been pregnant, I can't imagine how uncomfortable that must have been. The fact that they had only known each other 8 months and she was 7 months pregnant was like the elephant in the room the entire wedding. She refused to acknowledge the fact that she was pregnant. She had been out of college for 10+ years and invited all her sorority sisters. They got up and all sang this weird sorority song together. Very odd for an over 30 woman. I'm probably not explaining it very well, but it was like she was trying to act like she was much younger. They were married for about 4 years, way longer than anyone thought it would last. Story 3. A bunch of my family members are betting on how long one of my cousin's marriages would last. It's definitely going to end in divorce, but we just don't know when. Here's all the stuff that happened. Pre-wedding. The couple can't even agree on invitation card designs, so they decided each would have their own. Some people received 2 invitations. Wedding. They're both from different races, and the groom's family insisted on having a wedding ceremony from their culture too. The bride refused the part where she had to kneel before her husband and wash his feet clean. The groom's family insisted and she was stuck doing it. The bride got tired of all the photo taking and refused to pose for any more photographs, even though she hadn't taken photos with the groom's extended family. Meanwhile, she had already taken photos with her entire family, extended family, and parents' friends. The groom's cousin told the bride she walked inelegantly and she spent hours crying and refusing to come out for the wedding dinner. Half the groom's family boycotted the wedding over the bride's race and religion. Post-wedding. The bride insisted they should fly first class for their honeymoon. The groom insisted it was a waste of money, even though they both came from money. The bride flew first class, the groom stuck to economy. Story 4. Our friend was the girl who had spent a whole year setting up for the one day. They had taken 6 months of dancing lessons and she had spent a ridiculous amount of time looking good and dressing up her bridesmaids for the wedding, of which my wife was one. So come the night of the wedding, the groom meets up with his old friends and starts to get under the influence. He got so buzzed he didn't even recognize us, rather just pushing us aside to get to the bathroom. The worst part was the dance itself. It was really heartbreaking to see them stumble around and watch the panic on her face as he realized he had no idea what was going on. I gave it 6 months at the time, but it ended up being 3 years. She ended up marrying another woman. Well, I hope her wife is a better dancer. Story 5. I thought my sister's wedding was. Her husband got under the influence and they got into an argument. He passed out and she ended up throwing a bucket of ice water in his face to snap him out of it. She was devastated about it. Happy ending, he made it up to her big time. Also, he felt very out of it even the next day. Turns out he had traces of Rohypnol in his system. His own brother did that to him in hopes he wouldn't marry my sister because he wanted their own friendship to remain the same. My brother-in-law has disowned most of his family because of this, and his brother just got out of a 4-year prison sentence. Story 6. One of my childhood friends got married at 17 to her boyfriend of less than 3 months. At first, I was thinking, well, I know plenty of older couples that got married within a month. I was made a bridesmaid, so I was behind the scenes for the show. The first thing I noticed was wrong. He called her by the wrong name throughout their engagement. She has an unusual name, so I let it pass because I always just called her T when growing up. Second thing, the groom invited his ex-girlfriend to the wedding. You know, if you were good friends with your ex, I can see maybe inviting them, but not a girl who will show up and cry the whole ceremony. Third, the rubber piñata. Fourth, the bride's mother was so buzzed during the reception, she admitted that the bride's younger brother was the product of an affair of one of her patients, in front of the bride's father, her husband. Last but not least, the groom's father would not shut up about how he thought the whole thing was a mistake and how his son deserved a real woman. He made some lovely racial comments as well to the bride's family. When the bride asked the groom to get his father to stop, the groom replied that she should just get used to it. Psst, guess what? This video is sponsored by none other than me and my awesome crew at Rufus Rugs. We're the masters of creating custom hand-tufted rugs that truly capture who you are. Whether you're looking to turn one of our intriguing thumbnails into a rug, for purely academic reasons of course, or you're eager to transform your room with some epic anime-inspired designs, we can get it done for you. These are all handmade by me and the team from Canada. No dropshipping BS here. Real, handmade custom rugs by me and my friends. Click the first link in the description to learn more. Story 7. Not all of it was at the wedding, but on our way to our honeymoon, we were on a flight with this couple sitting behind us. She boarded the plane with a giant carry-on and a garment bag with her dress in it. Once they found their seats, she shoved her bags at him to put away and then went to use the lavatory for about 15 minutes. She was really nasty towards him the whole time. Fast forward to running into them at the resort. She was super stuck up and bratty to every female and all the staff. She didn't seem to have a problem dancing to 4 or 5 different guys during one of the dance night themed events while her husband drank alone at the bar. Finally, the day of their wedding came, and my husband ran into the groom sitting alone outside at the cafe with a drink in his hand. He sat down to chat with him, and the guy explained that he was freaking out because they had no friends or family at the wedding, because literally no one that knew him liked her or approved of the wedding, and that he wasn't even sure what he was doing there. My husband tells him he's sure it's cold feet and just to have a drink to calm his nerves. The groom replies that this is his 5th drink already. It's like 11 a.m. We had an oceanfront villa, and they got married right outside of our back door. He looked like he was going to bolt for sure. I guess that was her plan the whole time, trap him on a remote island. If you don't want to be in a situation, leave a like in this video and subscribe to the channel. Story 8. I went to a wedding 2 months ago that I really hope ends in divorce because of how miserable the situation is. First, some context. This is the first and only man the bride has ever dated or been intimate with. He has pushed her over many times and has cheated on her 3 times. Now for the wedding. The ceremony was 15 minutes and done outside in the city square. You could hear nothing. They had no vows, the kiss was lip to lip and lasted maybe 1 second. The after party was worse. The groom got buzzed, the pregnant bride sat with a miserable look on her face all night beside him. They had a cupcake tower instead of cake, and in the process of doling out the goodies, the bride dropped one. The groom snapped at her. "Those cupcakes are $5 a piece," and demanded she pick them up without even offering to help. Their first dance was middle school levels, 0 chemistry. The playlist sounded like it was made by a middle schooler. As a cute little joke, the maid of honor told the groom in her speech to lay your hand atop your wife's. Remember this moment, because it is the last moment you'll have the upper hand in this relationship. The groom pulled his hand away, smirked, and said, "Like hell it is." I could really go on and on about how awful the whole thing was. The worst thing was the bride's expression, like a wounded animal. Story 9. My cousin married a nice, respectable girl from Connecticut, but he is a not-so-nice, not-so-respectable Massachusetts stereotype from Norfolk County. Cuz got buzzed with his band of Mickeys and Sillies the night before, and when I saw him for pictures that morning, he was downing a pint of booze before throwing it in the corner of the church and calling his friend names. He had the same grin on his face every picture. I pumped some coffee into him. We thought we had it under control, but during the ceremony, he flipped off the guests twice. His brother also taped "Help Me" on the bottom of his shoes for when they took the mass. The bride's father was furious. But then came the reception. My mom didn't want to go. I wish we hadn't. Cuz continued downing the booze, as did his pals. The bride, God save her, wanted to go ahead with the first dance, Stand By Me. Cuz didn't put down his drink, was grabbing her in appropriate places during the dance, and finally spilled it all down her dress. She slapped him, he pushed her. The father of the groom charges the dance floor. The bench is clear. My brother and I asked Mom if she wanted to get us involved. She grabs her purse and says, "Let's leave." As his buddies were holding Cuz back, she walked over, slapped him, and said, "Thank God your grandmother is gone, you disgraceful little Mick." Mama's a very quiet woman. We grabbed Mama and hightailed it out. 2 cops passed us on the way in. They began the annulment 1 week later. I haven't talked to him since, although he emailed me asking if he could borrow $5,000. He lives in a camper, from what I hear. Story 10. Her vows. There are friends of mine who dated for nearly 2 years before their wedding. He loved her more than she loved him, obvious to all our friends, and we suspected she begrudgingly said yes to his proposal. He said his vows first and went on and on about loving her for the rest of his life. During hers, she started with 438 days. That's how long I've loved you. It seemed sweet until she ended her vows with, "And I promise to love you for at least 438 more. Most thought nothing of it, and some friends called me a jerk for saying it was a subconscious sign she wasn't in it for the long haul. She left him exactly that amount of days after their wedding with a note that said, "I kept my vow to love you for 438 days more, but I can't for a single day more." Called it. I can't even get mad at her for the dedication. It almost feels like a bit. Story 11. Not a wedding, but a proposal. The girl is a good friend from high school. She was 20 when this happened and the guy was 21. Guy proposes by changing his FB status to engaged and tags her girlfriend, then says, "What you think?" And she responded on Facebook, "Sure." The engagement lasted a month. Asked her about it later, seeing as agreeing to something like that seemed out of character for her. She told me at first she thought it was a joke, and then when she realized he was serious about marriage, thought maybe he was just asking her if she was ready to become engaged and that the real proposal was coming. Nope, that was the proposal. He even started trying to plan the wedding, to which she replied, "You haven't even proposed yet." I mean, he hadn't even gotten her a ring, which I know you don't have to, but come on. After she realized this was his way of proposing, she ended the engagement and he left her with, "If you aren't going to be engaged, then I don't see a point in staying." Poor girl was really broken up about it, but I think she dodged a bullet. Story 12. We hadn't met the groom more than twice before the wedding. Our friend had moved out of state, so we didn't see them often. My husband is an artist, and our friend asked him to draw a picture of the two of them, just a simple sketch to make copies of to use as a coloring sheet for kids at the wedding. He'd given me an odd vibe when we'd seen him before, but I was wrapped up in visiting with my friend who I didn't get to see enough, so I figured I just didn't know him well enough. When my husband and I went to hand him the copies before the wedding, he was very curt and emotionless. As we were about to leave the room, it was like a light went on and he graciously thanked us for the picture and thanked us for making the trip. It was as if he was an alien who remembered he had to act like a human. I had a terrible feeling, but who stops a wedding and says, "I don't know this guy, but he acted funny a minute ago, so stop the wedding?" Within a few months of the wedding, he became violent and threw her out of the house because her hair clogged the shower. She came back to get her things and he'd thrown them out in giant garbage bags with slurs written on them. He bugged her car and began to show up places he knew she'd be so that she'd be intimidated at events she wanted to attend or places she wanted to or needed to go. Even made a scene at her office. She changed her name to throw him off her scent. When she ran into his parents right after he'd thrown her out, she broke down and told them what was going on. They told her they were sorry, but he'd done this to her previous wife. They didn't say anything because they'd hope he'd changed. Though a lot of them are sociopathic. This was a few years ago and she's doing great. Very happy, healthy, and thriving. But I worry she may never feel like she can be with someone again. Story 13. Holy crap. My cousin Jan's wedding was basically just a preamble to an elaborate dance of divorce that we all knew was coming from the moment the engagement began. For context, this took place 15 years ago in the backwoods of NC. My family is just a generation or two removed from snake handling in church, so there's some wackiness. Just a few things that come to mind. Her fiancé proposed to her with the worst timing ever. It was over with the family watching TV when Jan's dad collapsed on the floor. He passed before emergency services arrived. Her boyfriend grabbed her hands as she was sitting next to her father, pulled her up to her feet, and then asked her to marry him. He later said that he didn't want her to get away. The fiancé then disappeared for a month the week after the funeral. Nobody knew where to reach him. The bride's white trash mother told Jan that she had to get married within 4 months because she planned to move to another state with her new boyfriend to avoid bill collectors. When Jan's fiancé showed back up, he was cagey and weird. Eventually, it came out that he'd been living with his ex-girlfriend because she insisted that he'd had to give her a month of his life, or she'd take him to court for child support that he was supposed to be paying on their infant son but had never paid. Throughout all of this, Jan continued to insist that she wanted to marry him. My mother and I did most of the wedding prep and arrangements. Jan's mom, despite insisting on the 4-month timeline to help pay for the wedding before her move, never contributed a dime, and we were both pretty convinced that the wedding was going to be canceled at any moment. But the day arrived, and so did the principal players. At the wedding itself, the groom walked around drinking PBR out of a massive travel thermos with a novelty straw and told everyone who would listen that Jan was a good starter wife. Jan threw several tantrums about stupid stuff, including one in which she accused the groom of stealing her drink. He told her she was a dumb idiot, but it all worked out because then she found her drink. The groom pulled the ring off of Jan's finger during the reception and swallowed it as a joke. The groom picked a fight with his father because his dad had asked the ex-girlfriend to stay at home, and the groom really wanted her to be there. Jan was in the dark about this invitation until the fight broke out. Epilogue. Shocking precisely nobody, except possibly Jan herself, they eventually did divorce. Eating the ring caused the groom some discomfort, so they had to cancel their honeymoon to the mountains so that he could go to the ER and get hospital-grade laxatives. They lost money on the cancellation and the ER visit, which they really didn't have to lose. That resulted in some immediate debt problems. They lost the trailer they'd planned to rent when they couldn't come up with a deposit. That resulted in both of them moving into the groom's parents' home, into his old bedroom. Things went downhill from there. The groom's ex-girlfriend popped back up less than 3 months after the wedding, heavily pregnant with his second child. She went after him for another shared month, but Jan wasn't cool with it. The ex ended up taking him to court for child support. Jan got a second job to make ends meet while resigning herself to living with her in-laws for a while longer. One day, after he dropped her off at work, the groom sold Jan's car. He then disappeared for several more weeks. She lost both jobs and shortly thereafter realized she was pregnant. The groom accused her of cheating because he thought he couldn't have more than 2 children in a lifetime, and his ex-girlfriend had already filled the quota. As I understand it, this is what ultimately caused the rift in their relationship. That was a wild ride, but I'm mostly concerned about how and why he managed to swallow her ring. Story 14. Several things. Number 1, the bride's 18th birthday was 7 days before the wedding. The groom was just a few months older. Number 2, maternity wedding dress. Her belly was bigger than her dollar store silk flower bouquet. Number 3, the groom's father officiated but did not look the groom in the eye once the entire day. Number 4, in the carpool on the way to the reception, one of our friends started a betting pool regarding how long the marriage would last. I bet 1 year, and as my bet was the closest to the actual time of separation, I won. Number 5, the groom spent the majority of the reception standing outside and chain-smoking with his best friend, and the bride eventually followed a group of us outside and called the groom out for avoiding her. In front of all their closest friends, he called her a clingy brat and then stormed away. She grabbed a cig out of my hand. Remember, she was pregnant as hell and said, "I hate him sometimes." They separated almost exactly a year later, though the divorce wasn't finalized for another year or so due to the multiple contentious court appearances and custody battles. Don't get married when you're 18. Don't get married just because she's pregnant. Don't let your hyper-religious parents pressure you into marrying someone you don't like. And for Pete's sake, you cannot love someone you dislike no matter how many mental gymnastics you do to convince yourself that it is possible. Story 15. My cousin's wedding. The groom invited his ex, who was also the mother of his 1-year-old son. He and my cousin had been dating for longer than 2 years, and my cousin, who was then very pregnant herself, got into a loud screaming match with him over it in the bathroom. They eventually came out and got married, my cousin with puffy red eyes from crying that you can see in every wedding photo that was taken. They're still together. They only got married last year, but from what happened then and what is going on now, I'm just counting down the days. My cousin's one of those people who shares everything on social media, and all of her posts are just full of regrets and despair and prayer requests because of her marriage, the relationship he has with his baby's mom, and her struggle with being a mother. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy what's your satisfying called it moment. Story 3 was satisfying. See you in that video.